in the NBA with some big-time news yesterday. Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers opting out of the final year of his contract, leaving the prospect open to him potentially leaving the Clippers in free agency. The reason why this is significant is because he said that yesterday he is willing and open to hearing pitches in free agency, which was not a sentiment that he was necessarily sharing earlier in the year. In fact, he said that he's expected to re-sign with the Clippers, but not on day one. Right? He said he will listen to other teams. And if we think about Kawhi Leonard, who he is as a player, this response and approach kind of perfectly sums up what we know about Kawhi Leonard and who he is. An unpredictable, little bit of an enigma, a guy that's more of a quiet, kept to himself, low profile type of player. And when we think about Kawhi and who he was meant to be, we think about, well, he was supposed to be the successor to Tim Duncan, to be the next soft-spoken and quiet face of the San Antonio Spurs. When he went to the Toronto Raptors, they offered him the country after he won an NBA title with the Raptors and he fled. Then he bamboozled the Lakers, pulled the rug right from underneath them, and he signs with the Clippers. So loyalty isn't a superlative when it comes to Kawhi. That's not in his repertoires to be loyal. And that's not meant as an insult. That's meant to highlight that for him, the priority's never been about loyalty. It's about what's in the best interest for him. He's kind of one of these quiet puppeteers that prefers to kind of operate in a cloak and dagger manner from behind the scenes, from backstage, as opposed to being front and center. And so the reason why this is important is because it brings up the question of leverage. Who's got leverage in this situation? Typically, leverage is such a transient, such an ephemeral thing in sports. It's very fickle. One moment, James Harden and the Houston Rockets, all of a sudden, the Houston Rockets have all this leverage because James Harden wants out, but the Rockets don't have to trade him. And then the next moment, James Harden puts on a couple pounds, looks like he can barely get up and down the floor, requests a trade, and all of a sudden exerts this cumbersome pressure on the Houston Rockets to trade him. Teams know that they can lowball him, and the Rockets cave, and the leverage shift to James Harden with the Packers. One moment, the Packers have all the leverage after Aaron Rodgers had a few mediocre seasons by his standards, and they draft Jordan Love. The next season, he wins the MVP, and the leverage shifts to him, and they acquiesce to most of his demands. So leverage is a very fickle thing, and the interesting question is who has the leverage between star athletes when the star athlete is injured? Because that's the situation here. All of this comes down to, and the reason why this is newsworthy to begin with, is because the injury is at stake. The injury didn't take place where Kawhi Leonard tore his ACL or partially torn his ACL. All of this would be a moot point. Because normally and traditionally, when a player sustains a major injury, suffers a major injury, the leverage is predominantly with the team, with the organization, because they really are the ones that are in control of this athlete's future, potential future salary. And most of the players don't want to risk losing potentially generational type of wealth, so they opt for a team-friendly deal. That's the traditional sense when it comes to leverage. But in this instance, this is one of those few instances where, to me, the leverage actually lies with the star athlete. Kawhi Leonard has all the leverage here with the LA Clippers, and it's not even close. This is a Clippers team that mortgaged their entire future to acquire Leonard and also to acquire Paul George. Kawhi Leonard put them on the clock and said, hey, I'm not coming here unless you get Paul George. And so the Clippers gave the Oklahoma City Thunder a huge haul. Let's revisit that. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, 5 future first-round picks, and 2 first-round pick swaps in the future to acquire Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, essentially, is what you gave up to acquire both of these guys. And so I don't want to hear about how last year, oh, well, Jonah, look how far the Clippers went without Kawhi. They did so well. Paul George was a great leader, yada, yada, yada. I don't want to hear that. The reality is the Clippers aren't going anywhere without Kawhi Leonard. If you think that they're going to trade or move off of him and be able to land some more talent that's going to make them relevant, you're sadly mistaken. This Clippers team has always been, in recent years, about going in right now, going all in right now. You think Steve Ballmer is trying to implode this roster, trying to blow up this roster and ship Kawhi Leonard because he doesn't want to potentially have to pay him max money after he tore his ACL? Steve Ballmer wants to win. Lawrence Frank wants to win. Ty Lue wants to win. If you want to win, you have to keep the star players around. Kawhi Leonard understands that, which is why he's opting out of this final deal. Sure, of course, obviously Kawhi Leonard wants the security. He wants the assurance of a long-term deal, of money that he can put right into his bank account right away. There's no question that's the truth. But conversely, it's also true that the Clippers understand where they would be on the totem pole, not just in LA, but in the NBA if Kawhi Leonard wasn't there. Because if you think that Paul George playing great for a 3-week stretch is sustainable throughout an entire regular season and even another entire postseason run, you're sadly mistaken. And Paul George, he proved a lot of doubters wrong. He stepped up. He was great this year in the postseason. But the reality is that's not a sustainable formula to win long term. That's a sustainable formula to stay above average. But the West is getting tougher and tougher every single year. And so they have to make it. If you're Lawrence Frank, if you're Steve Ballmer, if you're the Clippers, you have to make it your top priority at 6 p.m. Eastern time today, which is when free agency begins. You have to be at this man's door with an offer ready right away. Don't give him time to hear more pitches, because I guarantee you there's going to be a long line of suitors ready to snatch him up if the Clippers don't give him a big-time offer right away. Kevin Durant, we saw how the Brooklyn Nets moved heaven and earth to acquire him. I guarantee you, if Klay Thompson, if the Golden State Warriors shocked everyone and made Klay Thompson available, he would be gone off the open market within a week. And this is a guy that tore his ACL and ruptured his Achilles. Does not matter. There are a few stars that continue to wield that power and have that leverage. Kawhi Leonard is one of them. If you're the Clippers, take care of this business early. Don't give him an opportunity to see what else is out there and lock him up, or at least sign him to whatever deal he wants to be signed at.